The Rules Committee will come to order. We're here for consideration of the North American Made Energy Security Act, and we are very happy to welcome from the Committee on Energy and Commerce Mr. Terry, and we were expecting Mr. Rush to be here, and from the Committee on Natural Resources, Ms. Hanabusa. So why don't the two of you come forward, and if Mr. Rush comes in, we'll ask him to join us. Before we begin the hearing for consideration of this, I'd like to ask everyone to focus their attention over my right and left shoulder at the shoulders at the two new paintings that have just been added here, which are very interesting. They have been done by my very good friend, the famous artist in California, David Ashwell, and he talked about the fact that anyone can do a painting of the Capitol, but he and I were discussing this, and to focus on the fact, we know that in the Senate, one member can block anything, and the House of Representatives is clearly a majoritarian institution. It's a majoritarian body, and what he has done, this was his concept, and he's responsible for the painting here on the right. He came up with the idea of focusing on the ratio that exists in the Rules Committee, and so while you put those two paintings together, you have one Capitol dome, but right now, the way it is structured, it focuses on 4/13, which is the ratio on the Rules Committee, to 9/13. And so as you look at the Capitol dome, you're looking at 9/13 of it and 4/13 of it. And the point that I make is that's exactly what it was when I was sitting right here, and Ms. Slaughter was the chairman of the Rules Committee as well. So I just wanted to, since we've just put this up, encourage everyone to take a look at it. You have to come to our side to get the flag here. And by the way, I should tell you, I should say that my friend Mr. Ashwell's politics are a heck of a lot closer to yours than they are to mine. In fact, he would think of you to be a right-wing extremist nut. That's where my friend David Ashwell is. Wow. So I thank you. So let's proceed with our hearing and welcome Mr. Terry. Without objection, any prepared statement that you have will appear in the record in its entirety, and we welcome your summary.
I appreciate the new painting. That actually looks like the view from Omaha.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, I should tell you, Lee, that from that you're looking at Omaha.
Very good.
Actually, that's so looking due east. That is looking due east.
I can
looking
see
straight
it.
at Omaha. You can see Omaha off into the distance.
That was the Mississippi.
Yeah.
Well, it's the Missouri right now.
Right.
Well, Mr. Chairman Dreyer and Louise in her absence here. But I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you on my bill 1938, the NAMES Act, which I think garners greater energy security and creates jobs and economic development across this country. And I think really no matter which side of the Capitol you're on in this mural, we all want that. Energy security, more jobs, economic development. And we can accomplish that with this XL pipeline, a 1,700-mile long pipeline that will link enormous oil sand fields in northern Alberta to refineries in the Midwest and Gulf Coast. And this legislation in our committee has been bipartisan. In fact, it's gotten probably the most Democratic votes that we've had on a piece of legislation. I hate to say it's at 6, maybe 7, but it's still a record breaker for us. Now, it does have some detractors because of environmental issues of using crude, heavy crude. This, in turn, has been the root of the problem with providing the President the statutorily required suggestion or recommendation from State Department, gathering information from DOE on whether to approve this transcontinental pipeline. Most pipelines crossing the border have taken about 18 months to 24 months to approve. We are nearing the 3rd year anniversary of the application for the Keystone Pipeline. There has been 2 environmental studies done. The first one then a supplemental. There's been town halls held around the country, commentary taken, and they have enough time to do a second series of national town halls from North Dakota, Montana, all the way down to Texas. Now, this bill has gone through regular order. We've held our hearings. We've gone through subcommittee. We've gone through full committee. All this bill does is says by a date certain, the DOE with the State Department must give the President his the recommendation, and the President has to make a decision. Nowhere in this bill does it say what his decision has to be. It should be based on the science and the evidence that's provided to both of them. They already have volumes of it. So let's make a decision. Let's get the jobs rolling and the refineries growing. And I am ready for any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Terry. Ms. Hanabusa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm here to propose an amendment to Mr. Terry's H.R. 1938, and this is, in my opinion, a very commonsensical amendment. It has been ruled in order by the parliamentarian. It's germane, and it also has no monetary impact by the CBO. What this amendment seeks to do is to simply, prior to the President issuing the permit approving any construction and operation of the Keystone XL pipeline, is that the Secretary of Energy, in consultation with the PHMSA, certifies that, in fact, the worst-case scenario of an oil spill has been addressed. This bill, the amendment to the bill also includes in it a waiver provision that if, in fact, the Secretary, in consultation with the PHMSA, believes that the worst-case scenario has been addressed, that's it. It doesn't go any further than that. We are talking about an increase under H.R. 1938 from 700,000 barrels to 1,200,000 barrels per day of the crude going, as Mr. Terry has pointed out, basically transcontinentally. I believe that this simple amendment gives the people the assurance that we have addressed a worst-case scenario, and we all know that people are always concerned about that, and we are going to be transferring crude across the United States, and I think that's the least that we can do, and that's the purpose of this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me just say to both of you, as you know, job creation and economic growth is a priority that both Democrats and Republicans alike indicate that they're interested in, and our goal in moving this legislation is to, in fact, focus on the imperative of getting our country working again, and I believe that it'll go a long way towards that. Let me just say to you, Ms. Hanabusa, it's our hope that this committee will make an order. We have had 13 amendments submitted to us, and with the exception of duplicative or non-germane amendments, we're hoping that we'll be able to make all of the amendments in order, and I believe that that will include yours. And I have no questions other than to thank you both for your commitment to this. Mr. Sessions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Lee, the need to get this done is significant. Thank you, Chairman. Significant in that you have picked what I believe is a pipeline that could produce, as it says on page 4 or 5, 100,000 barrels per day of United States crude to market. Is this an example of one of many, or is this just the most significant one that is sitting out there waiting for, or has been waiting for?
This is the significant one sitting out there waiting, and it's been a long time. And it's 700,000.
Well, I'm sorry, I was just reading just the one page where I saw.
Yeah, it's pretty significant, and it can go up to 1.2, and it goes down to the refineries in Texas. Well, there's a couple others it branches off to along the way.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your not only paying attention to this. I think that we have to look at many times what is in the, so to speak, pipeline that's been waiting out there a long time that needs people to pay attention to it. I mean, if we're going to get any opportunity for us to become energy independent, we have to move those processes. Many times the debate in this committee is that, people have asked for all these things. They're not doing anything about it. And, of course, I think there is regulatory interaction that many times stymies the production, perhaps some common sense ideas. But when we find that they've been waiting this long, there obviously is a problem. And I think that your legislative answer is a good one. I intend to support it, and I thank you for bringing it to the floor today.
Thank you.
Mr. McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask unanimous consent, first of all, to have the statement by Representative Anna Eshoo appear in the record.
Without objection,
I'd also like to ask unanimous consent that the statement of administration policy be part of the record. The administration strongly opposes this legislation. And I just want to say for the record that, it's not like the administration is not looking at this issue and moving forward. I'd like to also put in the record a CQ article that appeared today until State Department set to resolve Canadian pipeline issue, semicolon, House may consider a bill, but implying that the State Department is doing its due diligence on this and, and doesn't believe that a bill like this is necessary given the fact that they're moving forward. There's another piece that, just kind of an interesting coincidence, I guess, a Reuters story about the Koch brothers that are positioned to be the big winners if the Keystone XL pipeline is approved. One of the things in this Reuters article that I find interesting is it says that although the pipeline, if approved, would increase the supply of oil reaching the U.S., a 2009 market analysis conducted by TransCanada, builder of the pipeline, forecast higher prices. The analysis, which TransCanada conducted as part of its Canadian permit application, projected the prices would increase about $3 per barrel as a result of the pipeline. That would send at least an additional $2 billion from American consumers to Canadian and multinational oil interests, despite the increase in supply. Given its deep involvement in the Canadian petroleum industry, the Koch brothers' operation stands to snare some of that windfall. And I like that, as we said, to put that on the record as well, Mr. Chairman.
Anything else for the record?
No, I'm going. There's a whole bunch of stuff here that I wish could be part of the record, but I think that'll be it for now. I guess one of the things that concerns me about this initiative is that we're basically you're coming up with an arbitrary date and basically forcing already an understaffed agency to try to figure out all the environmental consequences. My understanding is that there are ranchers and farmers and environmentalists, members of Congress who have expressed concern about this. There are lots of questions regarding the environmental impact. But I guess my question would be, in light of the BP Deepwater Horizon catastrophe last year and a series of refinery fires in recent years, why does anyone in Congress think it's a good idea to force understaffed agencies to rush safety and environmental reviews of an oil pipeline? I think the last thing anybody wants is to proceed in a way that doesn't dot all the I's and cross all the T's, but you put forward an arbitrary date that says you got to decide something, yes or no, by that date. Why don't we do this the right way?
Well, I think they should, and frankly, they have. PHMSA, the Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Agency, has reviewed this. There's been an environmental study that's done where several supplemental suggestions were made, which have been adhered to. There's been a second one that has been done. It has gone through the process. The issue then becomes, why are they dragging their feet then? No one's even saying that there needs to be more studies done. They said they're going to get more comments, of which we've calculated out that statutorily the time to get more comments is way before the deadline here. So what we're saying here is not to bypass anything or speed up anything. What we're saying here is stop delaying this. And yeah, it's an arbitrary date, but it's beyond everything that the time sequences that they need.
I would assume that if the relevant agencies were here, they would argue that they're not dragging their feet, that they're doing their due diligence.
Well, I would
They're not-
assume they'd say that, but I
Well,
would
no, and,
dispute
you know,
that with them.
But
Especially,
going back to the quote that I cited in the Reuters piece, about, where independent oil market analysts, have said that this won't in fact lower gas prices, that it will in fact lead to higher gas prices, particularly in the Midwest. And TransCanada's own outside experts say as much, as I mentioned in an analysis that TransCanada supplied with its application. What's your response to that?
it defies all common sense and logic that bringing in an additional 700,000 to 1.2 million barrels per day is going to increase prices. There is a comment made by TransCanadian that has been somewhat taken aback by others within there. The issue that they were getting to, or the one TransCanadian pipeline executive that made that comment to a regulatory commission in Canada, said that since this is heavy crude, as you know how the oil markets work, the sweet crude that requires less energy in its refining is cheaper on the market, more expensive than heavy crude. So being able to then better access even the heavy crude and have a pipeline where it can be safely and easily moved to the refineries in the United States from trucking could actually bring up the price a little bit just because it's easier to get to. But just common sense going to tell you if you have 700,000 to 1 million barrels are put on the market each day, it's actually going to decrease the prices at the pump. And that's the people that we're worried about. And I just want to make one further comment here, and that's no one has ever shown that Koch brothers have anything to do here, but certainly if you want to get into that, George Soros has more dollars at stake here.
Well, I would. I'd go back to that Reuters article, which I read, a quotation from noted that the Koch brothers are, quote, positioned to be big winners in the Keystone XL pipeline if approved.
And George Soros more so.
Apparently they own the crude terminal where Keystone XL would start up in Alberta, and they have massive investments in Canadian tar sands. Koch representatives wouldn't talk to Energy and Commerce Democratic staff. Why won't the majority honor Mr. Waxman and Mr. Rush's request to seek documents from Koch Industries relating to their interest in Canadian tar sands and Keystone XL pipeline? I think that's a legitimate request that Mr. Waxman and Mr. Rush has made.
With the gentleman yield, I thank my friend for yielding. Let me just say that apparently Mr. Rush has been unable to join us, and I was just informed that Mr. Waxman is here. So would you like to come forward, Mr. Waxman? And since we're engaging in a discussion that in which your name has just been invoked here, if you'd like to respond to any of the questions, if you have a statement you'd like to put into the record, we're happy to enter that into the record. And so I think it would be great if, since Mr. McGovern is raising questions on this, if you would might want to respond.
I didn't hear your question.
Yeah, I had read earlier quotations from a Reuters story that indicated that the Koch brothers would stand to benefit greatly if this deal were to move forward. And my understanding was that
My staff had contacted
they would not
them, and they said they had no interest in the pipeline. They didn't say whether they had an interest in the result of the pipeline. They weren't willing to tell us things that other oil companies were willing to tell us about the impact. But that as an aside issue, it skirts all the other reasons I'm against this bill and why I would urge you to allow members to offer amendments to try to make this bill better. One, it cuts through the process.
If the gentleman yield, let me just say to Mr. Waxman, as I said before you came into the room, we've had 13 amendments submitted to us, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to make all of the amendments in order that are not duplicative or are germane. And so we're trying our doggonest to do that of the 13
Well, I
amendments.
appreciate
So
that. I'm against the bill.
I thank my friend for yielding.
It's hard to imagine it being made into a bill that I would still feel comfortable supporting because it cuts the process short. That's already established under an executive order President George W. Bush had put into place. It denies other agencies the opportunity to comment on it. It says that this deal has to be approved in effect, and I think it's not a good deal because the Oil from these tar sands is in the life cycle far more polluting, and by going forward with this, it locks us into, I think, a 50-year period that we have to live with this pipeline and its impact. So it's a decision we need to get right, and this short circuits everything to try to determine one particular outcome, no matter what the evidence may be. And I think that's not the job of Congress.
Well, I'll just close by saying, I continue to be baffled why we continue to subsidize big oil companies at the rate that we do, and I think a better discussion would be how we eliminate some of these subsidies. But having said that, I would also feel much better if we were actually investing in some of these new and alternative and cleaner, greener sources of energy. I mean, we are falling behind the rest of the world, and we seem to be doing the same old, same old. And I, for a whole bunch of reasons, I think this is the wrong way to go, and with that, I yield back my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. McGovern. As I said, we'll enter your statement to the record. Mr. Waxman, and appreciate very much your being here. Ms. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no questions to ask of the folks who are here. I appreciate their work, and I would say that whatever we can do to increase the supply of energy in this country, we need to be doing. And I take sort of the opposite point of view of some of our colleagues. We don't need to be slowing things like this down. We need to be doing due diligence and moving them along, because the American people are really hurting. The price of energy is way too high. Thank you for your good work.
Mr. Hastings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And before making my comments, I put my bona fides on the table with reference to environmental concerns. I've made it very clear through the years as a Floridian that I oppose the offshore drilling circumstances, and of course this is cross-border and not offshore. But it was President Bush that issued an executive order that permitted the State Department to have the ultimate authority or discretion as it pertained to off or cross-border pipelines. The question that I have, I guess, or several, Mr. Terry, am I correct that the State Department has publicly committed that they would finish this permitting by December 31st, 2011?
They have stated that's their new goal. They have stated that that's their new goal, is to have the recommendation by then.
Was this before or after the introduction of your legislation?
It was, well, this was in the works, they said. It was sometime before beginning drafting and introduction.
Now, your legislation then requires the permitting to be undertaken and the President to make a decision by November of 11. Am I correct in that regard?
Yes, you are.
So a month is what we're talking
2
about.
months.
2 months?
December 31st to November 1st to December 31st.
So 2 months.
Yeah.
And there are a considerable number of states that have ongoing concerns, and there are farmers and ranchers. And I guess I raised the Florida issue. I don't know all of the aquifers in America, but I know the two main ones in Florida are continuously encroached upon. And in this particular instance, the aquifer that this thing transgresses or goes over is a very shallow aquifer. And don't you think that those people would be concerned that this may very well have some substantial intrusion on their environmental concerns, the 6 or 7 states that are concerned about it?
Sure, I would expect that, and that's why the 2 environmental studies should be relied upon.
Okay, so then let me go to present capacity. Is there anything to suggest that the present capacity that these people have for delivering these tar sands is needed to be enhanced or increased?
Yes.
And what is that? Is it
Well-
about prices? Or
No, it's about getting it from point A in Alberta to the refineries down here.
down here in Texas?
Down here in Texas, I think there's one in Oklahoma, Chicago, it'll hook up and split off.
And those refineries,
Down in the United-
are they operating at full capacity?
Well, I know the one in Texas, and I'm not sure, maybe Mr. Sessions can help me, but they're going to double their size of their current facility to be able to handle this oil that's coming
When
down.
was the last refinery really built in America?
30-some years ago.
Point to be taken.
Gentlemen, you
Yeah, and that's,
Sure, I'll yield to the gentleman.
yeah, we need more, I would agree with you.
let's suppose the pipeline is full. I think it's where it comes from and who we had to buy it from is very important. And if we bought this perhaps from more reliable friends that we would choose to do business with, I think that's a point that
I don't
would
quarrel
be
with
very.
that. I happen to
I just have to add that.
a substantial number of Canadians in the congressional district that
Well, I'm talking about other places we buy things from also. I appreciate the gentleman's answer.
I certainly understand what you're saying, but at the very same time, perhaps I should put it a different way. Montana, North Dakota, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Texas, and those on the Gulf of Mexico have continuing concerns about this. And what is Keystone XL's safety record? And I think that that's something that needs to be looked at. Let me tell you an amendment that I offered that the parliamentarian said was not germane. And perhaps I'll ask you, Mr. Terry, would it bother you if a waiver were given for the amendment that I offered that would allow for strict liability for cross-border pipelines, the same as we learned from the BP spill? We had a liability provision. Since then, you and I have voted or not talked about or had any reason to talk about, but we voted to increase that liability factor after the BP spill. We learned something, and we didn't have enough coverage. Now we're getting ready to run a pipeline, and I asked about their safety record, but I know a little bit about it. They've already had a 1,000 barrel spill in the Yellowstone. They've had a 20,000 barrel spill in a small tributary in that general vicinity. And I'm not suggesting, listen, let me make it very clear. Jim has it, McGovern has it right. It's one thing to keep doing what we are doing with fossil fuel, but tar sands are some of the worst forms of the kind of potential damage to the environment. Now, when do we decide that we are going to let these same, you know who's going to run solar, wind, thermal? The oil companies and the power companies. Those are the people that are ultimately going to do it. Beyond my lifetime, Lee, you'll probably still be here. But that said, I don't understand. I asked the capacity question. Jim asked, and I echo the cost of factor, prices that are involved. If it's going to give Canada $4 billion more or Canada XL, I don't care whether it's who's behind it. Somebody else is going to be making a ton of money, and mine and your gasoline prices, particularly the farmers and the ranchers in that vicinity, gasoline prices are going to go up. Now, I don't understand that. I just, can you help me understand that a company that doesn't have the world's best safety record is one that we are hurrying up to permit?
Well, first of all, I don't think we're hurrying up, frankly. All of the information is
About
there.
2 months, Lee. In the other 2 months.
Well, all right, 60 days, but they have all the, Elsie, the issue here is that they have all of the data. They've already done all of the statutorily required public hearings. They want to do another round, and they have time to do that. In fact, they're setting them up in Nebraska I can't remember the date. I don't know if they set a date, but it's going to be in late August. So they're doing those things already. And the other part is, whoever we buy the energy from, whether it's Canada or Saudi Arabia, we're going to be sending them money. And I'd rather it be Canada than Venezuela or Saudi Arabia.
Well, you and I and all of us here in Congress are probably not on that spot market out there where these people do all this trading. And they're all the same people as far as I'm concerned. America's just in it and we just consume an awful lot of it. But I went past my most important question to you, is whether or not it would give you any heartburn if we had an amendment that the floor could vote on, and if the committee gave me a waiver to have liability be perceived more strictly. I might add,
and maybe ask Henry that same question too, because my understanding of current law is just when it crosses the border into the U.S., that pipeline, our pipeline laws and liabilities adhere to that. The second aspect of that, on whether I would agree to that, I've had several ruled out. Maybe we can have a little quid pro quo on my next one.
Okay, I hear you. Mr. Waxman, any reaction to what I had to say, particularly about the tar sands and their toxicity?
Well, I'm very nervous about this pipeline because they have a record of a lot of leaks from this pipeline. They're going to go through an area where there's a huge aquifer called the Ogallala Aquifer. It spans 8 states, provides drinking water for 2 million people. Shallow water table and highly porous soils mean that a spill can spread rapidly. I don't know if once they cross into the United States, if they're held to the same standards or not for liability, but they ought to be held to the same standards as anybody else, any other pipeline.
I thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hastings. Let me just say again, as I did to Mr. Waxman, we're hoping that this committee will make an order most all the amendments that have been submitted to us. As I said, Mr. Hastings was withdrawn by virtue of it being non-germane based on the list here, and we have a couple of others that are in question, but we're hoping to make them all in order. Mr. Bishop.
You know, Mr. Terry, I am deeply concerned about your efforts here to rush this project along. I mean, we're talking about a pipeline. That's got to be cutting-edge technology. I mean, we've never dealt with pipelines before in other places. Obviously, it's going to take time to try and figure out how to deal with a pipeline. You've had an EIS as well as a supplemental. You are actually assuming that the government has the time and the ability in the first environmental impact statement to actually do all the studies and get the work done, rather than making at least 4 or 5 studies on the same topic. That effort to try and circumvent the process by pushing that forward worries me. I mean, there is a proposed amendment in here that talks about our policy should be not to get energy from hostile nations. I mean, we're talking about Canada up there. That has to be a deep concern at some other time. You're actually asking the President to try and coordinate different agencies of the federal government to work together and do it in a timely process. When was this permit started?
September. We'll be on the 3rd year anniversary in September.
3 years?
3 years.
You expect government to make decisions and move things forward and have a policy in just 3 years?
When you put it that way, it sounds so radical, but yes.
I'm appalled that you can do this. It may indeed be that tar sands are more toxic than something like oil shale. And, you know, the idea that we have in the United States, oil shale that would be providing us a source of energy that would be more deeper and longer lasting than what we find in Saudi Arabia. No, we can't do that because we've already banned that concept of developing the oil shale in the United States. I guess we have to go somewhere else to do that kind of stuff. But I am concerned at how fast you're trying. I mean, 3 years. is just like 3 years in trying to come up with an answer and a solution. I think you should rethink how fast you're trying to push the federal government into coming up with a decision. It's frightening. I yield back.
The answer is yes or no, right? I mean, there could be a no.
Yes, and there's nothing in here that suggests what the State Department should recommend or what the President should do in regards to the yes or the no.
Thank you all very much for being here, and again, let me say that we look forward to having a free-flowing debate on the House floor, and we're looking forward to making in order Mr. Kucinich's amendment, but he'd still like to come and testify before us, I think. So we welcome you, Mr. Kucinich, and let me say again that I'm hoping that the committee will follow my recommendation to allow your amendment to be debated on the House floor. So if that's a signal to you that we're going to do something positive, I don't know how much more you want to say, but we certainly welcome any prepared statement that you have that you'd like to enter into the record, and we welcome a summary.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I have a prepared statement that I'm going to offer for the record, and I want to tell the chair I would appreciate his support for this amendment to be raised on the floor. Thank you.
You bet. Any questions for Mr. Kucinich? Okay. Thank you very much for being here. That will conclude the hearing, and the chair will entertain a motion from the gentleman from Dallas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the committee report a structured rule for consideration of H.R. 1938, the North American Made Energy Security Act. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate with 30 minutes equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member on the Committee on Energy and Commerce, 20 minutes equally divided and controlled by the chair, ranking member, a minority member of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, and 10 minutes equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member on the Committee on Natural Resources. Rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. Rule provides that the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Energy and Commerce shall be considered as an original bill for the purpose of amendment shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the committee amendment in the nature of the substitute. The rule makes in order only those amendments printed in the report accompanying the resolution. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed, may be offered only by a member designated, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to demand for division of the question. All points of order against amendment are waived. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instruction.
You've heard the motion of the gentleman. Let me state at the outset that, again, of the amendments that were submitted to us, those that are germane and are not duplicative, we are making an order, and all of the amendments are offered by Democrats. There are no Republican amendments that are made in order. Any discussion or amendment? Mr. McGovern.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee grant H.R. 1938 an open rule so that all members have an opportunity to offer amendments to the bill on the floor. And I just would add that I think there are serious environmental questions and there are safety issues. And I think in light of some of the catastrophes that we have seen recently, including the BP catastrophe, I think it pays to get this thing right and not rush it. And given the importance of this issue, and I think there are a lot of members who, as they get to realize this committee will have some other ideas, and I hope that they'll be given the opportunity to be able to offer germane amendments on the floor that they haven't brought to the Rules Committee tonight.
Well, I thank the gentleman. Let me say, obviously, we totally concur with the notion of getting this right, and that's why we're making the amendments in order that have been submitted to us, and we will, and I encourage a no vote. Those in favor of the amendment, governmental vote aye. Those opposed, no. In the chair, the noes have it. The noes have it. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions. No. Mr. Sessions, no. Ms. Fox. No. Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Woodall. No. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Nugent. No. Mr. Nugent, no. Mr. Scott. No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Webster. No. Mr. Webster, no. Ms. Slaughter. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings.
Aye.
Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis.
Aye.
Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No. And the clerk will report the total.
3 yeas, 8 nays.
And the motion is not agreed to. Are there further amendments? If not, yes. Oh, Mr. Hastings.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule, and I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for the amendment by Mr. Markey, number 5, which would require that any crude oil and bitumen transported by the Keystone XL pipeline or any resulting refined product is sold in the U.S. and allows for exceptions under certain circumstances.
Let me just thank the gentleman for his amendment. Let me say that issue is addressed in another amendment that is offered by Messrs. Murphy, Cohen, and Welch, and so I'd urge a no vote on the Hastings amendment. Those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The chair, the noes have it. The noes have it. The motion is agreed. Are there further amendments? If not, the vote occurs on the motion of the gentleman from Dallas. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. The chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. And Mr. Webster will be managing this rule for the majority.
Mr. Hastings.
And Mr. Hastings for the minority. Let me just say that I think that the word is out now this evening, the proposal to deal with the debt ceiling increase and spending cuts is going to be put online this evening to comply with a 3-day reporting requirement, and we are scheduling a meeting tomorrow for 3 p.m. for consideration of that measure. We are talking about the plan that you can call it whatever you want. I mean, I'd call it.
You said it is a debt ceiling plan, but this is the one that's offered by Speaker Boehner.
Well, I mean, it's.
Which is fine with me.
Let me just say, it's the one. It was the one that Speaker Boehner and Leader Reid agreed to.
All right.
So I consider it to be a bipartisan proposal that we will have before us.
All right.
So without objection, the committee stands adjourned.